Welcome to the High School Administrator's Winter Assessment Training. My name is Kiana Hennigan, and I am the Student Assessment Coordinator for Everett Public Schools, and I'll be taking you through what you need to know today. By the end of this training, you're going to understand how our department communicates with administrators and how you can successfully pass these communications on to your staff. You're going to learn the winter assessment basics: who, when, how, and what are you expected to do. What you can do to start preparations for spring testing, expectations around accommodation and supports for state and national assessments for your students, how to ensure that testing runs smoothly in your school, and of course, the most important thing that you can always call, email, or Teams message your friends here in assessment and research for help. We are always standing by for you. I'm not going to read for you the agenda, but I have some new items in here, some new stuff about College Board. I've got some new stuff about accommodations and supports I'm excited to share with you guys today. But before we get started, I want to talk a little bit about Smokey Bear. Smokey the Bear will show up from time to time on my slides, and it's to remind you that there's something you can do to prevent a problem later. As Smokey tells us, only we can prevent forest fires. We are each individually responsible for preventing assessment problems, and there are specific tips that I'm going to give you that will help you to ensure that everything is nice and easy. So look for those Smokey Bears and assign people to help you with those tasks, and think carefully about your planning so you have a nice testing season. This is the annual assessment calendar. We call it the blue calendar here in our office. And just to remind you, we are heading into that winter season where we are going to start having assessments show up for you. And we really want to start planning ahead, thinking about spring testing and how we're going to make sure that that works out nicely for our students. That's why we're here today. Let's begin with WIDA access. There are several WIDA assessments. This is the annual accountability assessment that measures English language proficiency. These students who are English proficient are going to exit from English language services. So all the students who test are all the students who are getting English language services. This is your ML students or your Title III students in grades K through 12. The window is January 29th through March 22nd. The proctor trainings are facilitated by my department and categorical. In terms of administrator training, this is your administrator training. Your building plan is due December 15th. Let's talk about your responsibilities. You need to select a school coordinator. This is generally the person who's over ML students at your school, and they're going to coordinate with your ML designator coach. You're going to complete your building plan and get it in by December 15th so that I have some wonderful reading opportunities over winter break. You're going to make sure that if you do have any accommodated paper booklets, that there's some place to store them at your school that your ML designates, your success coordinators can reach. Please make sure that all of your staff attend training. They cannot give the assessment without attending the official training. Please ensure that staff have appropriate testing spaces, that these staff who are proctoring have coverage for their normal duties, and that they're notified of any planned interruptions, so drills or announcements. Even those that are supposed to be a surprise, you can always suggest, hey, you shouldn't test today. You're going to have to pick a different day. You're going to want to touch base somewhat regularly with your ML designates and make sure that they're making progress. You're going to get an email weekly from categorical that's going to indicate to you how many of your students have tested. You'll want to keep an eye on that email, have those conversations, and make sure that any roadblocks that your designate is bringing up to you, they're going to be addressed. You need to assist them in addressing those roadblocks. You're going to report any incidents in ARMS and EDS within 24 hours of me notifying you to do so. And you're going to submit your paperwork by March 25th. I will send a nice checklist to you in the principal's packet to remind you of what's coming, and I'll also coordinate with your success coordinators on those materials. Let's talk a little bit about progress towards proficiency. That WIDA access test is what is exiting students from services, and we know that the expectation from the federal government is that we are exiting students from services within 6 school years of when they arrive here. You'll notice in the data that most of our students are not on track to exit within that 6 years, and we are accountable for that progress. So let's talk about what can we do to support our students and improve our students who are progressing. So the first thing is we can provide accommodations and supports with fidelity. Make sure we know what students are supposed to have and make sure that they're provided those supports, that they get practice, that we are using best practices around supports. We can review our students individually to ensure that the supports are being correctly identified. There are some differences between accommodations and supports in WIDA versus SBA, and the IEP software is really intended for use with tests like SBA. So we want to individually assess students and make sure that they're getting supports for WIDA that are available to them. And I'm on hand to help your staff with that. Please let me know. We're going to make sure that the test is provided in an appropriate and supportive setting. We don't want to provide the test in a setting that's not conducive to students focusing and doing their best work. Obviously, doing scholastic work is best done in a classroom setting. So we want to just be thinking about how can we do our very best to ensure they're successful in terms of picking spaces. And then, of course, we should be providing training and support for all of our staff to meet the needs of multilingual learners in a variety of contexts. That means using our GLAD and SciUp best practices to ensure that students are getting the most they can out of our curriculum and instruction. All of our ML students are in non-ML classes throughout the days, and they need support in those classes as well as in their ML classes. WIDA alternate access. We generally call that the ALT access. It's the annual accountability test for English language proficiency, just like the regular WIDA access, but it's a paper pencil test, and it is specifically designed for students with cognitive disabilities. At this moment, you cannot use ALT access to exit services, though my understanding is that that may change in the immediate future. But for right now, we are going to hold where we're at for ALT access. Who takes this test? This is your students in kindergarten through 12th grade who, if they were in an SBA year, they would qualify for WAAIM, meaning that they're at least 2 standard deviations below in adaptive and cognitive. In terms of the window, it's the exact same window as WIDA, 129 through March 22nd. The proctor training will be facilitated by myself and special services. There is no administrator training, and the building plan is due December 15th. Let's talk about your duties. You're to select a school coordinator. I recommend that this be the administrator who covers special education, case managers and paraeducators in that program. This is the person who is best suited to talk to case managers and paras about individual student needs and who's probably most familiar with those students already. You're going to complete that building plan and get it done by December 15th. You're going to work with the case manager to select an appropriate proctor and ensure that that appropriate proctor attends training. So that proctor can be a case manager, they can be a paraeducator, but I want you to think really carefully about there's a half-day training just to give the test, and then giving the test itself, it's going to take time, individualized time. And so you need to think about who can most easily be out of the classroom with minimal class disruption. It may be better if your proctor is a para and not the teacher. You need to think about your options. A good proctor candidate is someone who knows the students and is aware of any idiosyncratic communication that the student might make. If the student has a disability that impacts their speech in some way, it may be that someone has a specific knowledge of that student's speech and would be really helpful for giving that assessment. So think about that. If a student doesn't have idiosyncratic speech and doesn't have idiosyncratic communication styles generally, that's less of a challenge. This person needs to be able to work without significant management to complete testing on time. You're not going to be able to directly constantly supervise them, nor are other people in the classroom. If you were to pick a para, the teacher will be busy supervising and teaching the class. Moving on to the next set of duties, they need to be able to administer an assessment in a one-on-one environment successfully. So they need to be able to be one-on-one with that student comfortably. Also, you want to think about how many students you have. If you have a ton of students and you only have one person who's completing that testing, they're going to be out a lot. And that's fine if you have a plan for that. You want to think about the trade offs. There's pros and cons to who you select. So think carefully. Moving on from the proctor, you need to make sure that there's appropriate storage space for those secure tests. If you have WIDA alt testers, they're going to have a number of different booklets. Those booklets need to be accessible to whoever's proctoring the test, so make sure they have a locked, secure space for that. You're also going to make sure that the staff have access to appropriate testing spaces, whether that's a small table in the way back of the standard room, or if that's a small additional room, they need to have a space where they can get that student tested. And like I said, this is highly individualized. So what's good for one student may not be good for all students. So please have a plan as to where you're going to test that student. You're going to want to touch base with that proctor to make sure that they're making sufficient progress. My recommendation is that you do that within the first week of March. Troubleshoot problems with them if they're having a hard time getting students to complete the assessment. We need to figure out what we're going to do about that. You can talk to case managers as well. You can talk to me about that, but let's figure out how to make sure that that test gets done on time. No student can go without being tested. If you have any incidents, you're going to report them promptly in ARMS within that 24-hour window. The same paperwork checklist I will be providing with alt access that I provide with the regular WIDA access. And finally, we're going to be discussing WIDA Screener. WIDA Screener has been happening the entire school year at your school, but there are still some things we need to think about. Please make sure that your staff have appropriate testing spaces still. We do still have kids coming in onesies, twosies, and they still need a good place to test. We still need to be paying attention. The proctor should be notifying the office, but if you know you have drills and announcements and things, it may be worthwhile just to make sure that they're kept in the loop on those items. You're still reporting incidents in ARMS, and if you had a fall incident, I know at least Jackson had a fall incident. I can't remember if it was successfully reported or not. I will be sending out reminders to any schools that had incidents prior to the opening of ARMS. It is now functioning for WIDA Screener, so you can enter those incidents. If they don't get entered by winter break, I will go ahead and send a reminder out. But don't worry, you're not late. The state was late. All right, you're going to submit all that paperwork by June 10th. It's going to come in with your spring paperwork, and I'm going to cover all the paperwork pieces when we meet again for spring training. World language assessment, we still have some tasks. You need to communicate with your staff about making sure they send their students. The student signed up for it. They need to send their student down, particularly if you're one of those schools that only has one testing date. If you have a bunch of students that don't show up at your testing location, you're going to be doing those makeups yourself. You're going to minimize interruptions, and part of how you're going to do that is by communicating out to your staff that the test is happening. You're going to make sure that your teachers are not using GoGuardian or class policy to lock the internet of individual student computers during class time during those testing dates, because they can kick your student out of the test. So please, when you're sending out that reminder about, hey, we're doing this testing today, please don't use GoGuardian and class policy, and don't send kids to the library or wherever you're testing. Okay, you're going to ensure that your office manager is aware that materials are coming just ahead of time, like 1 or 2 days before the test, and they need to be held somewhere to await the proctor, substitute proctor person who is coming to cover that test. Please also make sure your office is aware of the test dates and when proctors are expected. I just emailed you the list of who your proctors or proctor are. Please make sure your office manager gets that so they know what's up. They've got a lot of stuff going on. Please make sure you're avoiding announcements and other disruptions. You do not need to turn off your bell, but please plan when you're calling the students down and all of your announcements on those days accordingly. Please make sure your phone interviews are promptly scheduled. As soon as you hear from us to schedule that interview, please do so. Pick dates as soon as possible. We want to get those scores flipped around to you guys as quickly as we can. And to the extent that you can, please get all of your testing completed by December 15th. It would be great if we had the opportunity to make all of the results materials over winter break. So that stuff will just magically arrive right after the window as far as you guys are concerned, and that's our goal. So please do complete makeup testing by December 15th. Please make sure that you're getting things filed and distributed in terms of test scores and family letters as quickly as possible. Make sure that eSchool is getting updated properly, noting when students are proficient, and also making sure that those signed credit letters are getting filed in CUNE files and the credits are getting applied. And the reason that we care about that um, is that there is no WLA score record database. If we don't get that stuff filed promptly, if we don't get those things out to students promptly and get them back and get their transcripts taken care of promptly, if those kids leave, no one will ever know the student tested. They will never get credit. It'll be a real bummer. So please pay attention to that. And of course, as we're approaching the season of graduations, we want to be thinking about those Seal of Biliteracy materials. I will be putting out a principal packet in the spring, reminding you when you need to order it so you have all your materials by commencement. So please be thinking, who's the person who's in charge of commencement? I'm going to need to identify that person and do some things before the end of the year. Moving on to School Stakeholder Annual Survey, the SAS, as we call it in my office. This is a survey about various aspects of school. It's provided to staff, families, and students in grades 3 through 12. And I think it's just important to make a plug here. These results are used to make significant and important decisions here in the district. So we really want as many people as possible to respond to these surveys. We want all of our stakeholders to have a voice here. Something to note about the window is the staff window this year is a little different than usual. It's January 16th through February 16th, and the student and family survey window is different. It is February 26th through March 29th. Please make note of that. If you scheduled any meetings or any communications to go out, you're going to want to make sure they're still falling at the right time. We suggest things about those communications in the building plan, so please be aware of that. There's no training, but there is a building plan. The building plan is due December 15th, and your first administrator duty is to complete that and get it in on time. It's really important that you do that because there are some things that we need to prompt here at our office, and if you don't get that in on time, then we may not get your stuff prompted in the right time. Okay, you're going to send all the communications that you need to send, the communications to families. You're going to make sure all of that stuff goes out, and you should be highly motivated to do that because we really, really want participation. One of the ways you can ensure participation, particularly of your students, is by checking your participation rates in Panorama every week and taking action if participation is low. To see your student participation rates, you go to School, Student Comparison Response Rate, and look through there. Remember, you can remind staff to give the survey. This is a captive audience, and I think it's reasonable to expect 90% student participation, so let that be your goal. If you have teachers who haven't gotten that survey taken, go find those teachers and remind them to give the survey. We want to know what those students think, and we especially want to know what students think in terms of like the kinds of students who don't want to fill out our dumb survey, right? Those are the kids we need to hear their voice. Moving on to College Board assessments. We're approaching SAT on March 13th. SAT measures our student performance against national book benchmarks for grade 11, and we use it for college admissions and scholarship awards and all kinds of stuff. It's also a graduation pathway option for ELA and math. It is up to your school if you guys want 12th graders to participate. You can charge them the fee to participate in SAT. It can be payable by your school or by the student. However you want to decide it, the bill for all 12th graders, if they test, will go to your school. So you'll need to decide. We'll cover the bill for all grade 11 students, and we will be working on those registration pieces when we return from winter break. Proctor training is online through College Board. Administrator training is online through College Board. The building plan is due December 15th, and similar to PSAT in the year, we don't have all of those final dates for you yet, but I will be sending them out as soon as I have them, be organizing materials for you to the best of my ability. I'm going to try and support you as much as I can. Your administrator duties include selecting your school coordinator, making sure your proctors are trained, making sure you have adequate staff and classroom space available for your school coordinator so they can plan this thing, and then of course ensuring that registration and rostering are completed in a prompt fashion. Remember, this will be our first digital SAT. The digital SAT has nearly identical specifications It's the same length, it's the same software, it's probably a similar training. It will also have a digital readiness check. It's very similar to digital PSAT. So you're going to want to use your experiences with PSAT to plan your SAT. If you had trouble with accommodations on PSAT, you should expect that you will probably have problems with accommodations on SAT. So on and so forth. We're going to want to be thoughtful as we're approaching SAT and think back to that PSAT experience. There are accommodations coming up, accommodations due dates. So first, we want to review those College Board accommodations at IEP and 504 meetings at each grade level. We want to ask students questions like, hey, you had 50% extra time. Was that too much time? For example. We want to send any updated and or new forms to Lindsay DeCarteret if you have any changes. Please remember, you don't need to send in the form every year. It just needs to be sent in when you need a change or you need a new thing. Do not miss the deadlines. College Board is not friendly towards late requests. Please note also with PSAT, we were not able to do anything day of about any missing accommodations or supports or any extra accommodations or supports. And my expectation is that it will be the same exact thing with SAT. So we should not expect that things should be late. So just a reminder, PSAT, the next one will be October of 2024. That's next school year. The grade level will be grade 10, which are our current freshmen, which means current freshmen who need accommodations. Those accommodations are due at the end of this school year, June 22nd, 2023, because they will be due like the second day of school to College Board. And Lindsay needs to have time to manually enter those accommodations for you guys. So make sure those get in by the end of the year for your current freshmen. For your current 11th grade students, they'll be taking SAT School Day on March 13th, and their accommodations are due to Lindsay on December 15th. Do not believe any lies that you read from College Board about much later due dates. Lindsay has to hand enter these. She has to come up with paperwork to support some of these accommodations. Do not wait. Turn those in before you go to winter break if you want to guarantee that it happens. Regarding AP, the next AP tests are happening in May. Some of those will be online, some will be paper pencil. It varies by subject and by school, and that could include students in grades 9 through 12. Earlier in the year, we sent you your list of 9th grade students who were enrolled in AP classes so you could shake a tail feather on getting those accommodations in. If you guys did not do that, it needs to be done pronto because those are due December 15th. Let's move on to Spring YA. This is the state and federal accountability assessment for students with significant cognitive disabilities, like SBA and WACAS. It's administered by case managers in a one-to-one setting. Scores are reported online through a special website called DRC Insight. This is for qualifying students in their standard SBA and WACAS grades 3 through 8, 10, and 11. The window stretches from January 29th all the way to May 3rd, but the teacher due date for data entry is April 24th. The proctor training will be held by Special Services and myself, and it was held in October. If you have any new teachers who need to be trained, please reach out to either myself or to Bevan Storla at your earliest convenience so we can get that rolling for that teacher. This is the administrator training for that assessment, and your building plans are due December 15th. Your administrator duties include selecting a school coordinator, completing your building plan, making sure Penny Bravo knows about any new YAIM students. We don't have a good way of knowing what's in transfer students' IEPs, so please make sure that someone notifies our office. If you are wondering about students who might be using Spring YAIM to fulfill graduation pathways, you can always check with Holly Tweet regarding grade 11 and 12 students and whether or not they need to test. She and I are always in close contact. Please review the status email that you're going to receive on April 25th or 26th. That will be the email where I tell you everything is in and everything is great or something is missing. If something is missing, please make sure that the missing items are completed by May 3rd. That is a hard deadline. There is no late work, no signatures, no nothing accepted after that May 3rd deadline. So we want to be very mindful about that. We're going to submit our paperwork by May 6th. I will make a checklist available to you in April, and I will send you that reminder on the 25th and 26th of anything else that needs to be done for YAIM at that time. Interim assessment blocks are open. Those are those online interim assessments in English and math that we use the regular WCAP, the Washington Comprehensive Assessment Portal, program portal application to do. That's for students in grades 3 through 12, but it's by teacher or school choice. The window opened in November and will close in June. Please be thoughtful about giving interims in June. If you want to talk about that more, give me a call at 4057. The proctor training should be facilitated by your school. If there is a proctor training required by you for people who are new to using interim assessment blocks, or you could invite me over. I'm happy to come and facilitate that or provide you with the slide deck. Whatever you want, let me know. There is no specific administrator training, but I'm happy to do so upon request. There's no building plan. And really your main duties for interim assessment blocks is to make sure that staff are aware of any changes to interim systems and know where to find the materials that they need to give those interim assessments. Those were all in the principal packet that came out earlier in the year when the system opened. I'm happy to resend that over to you. Just shoot me an email and I will send that over right away. And then, of course, if you do want a training, please schedule that with me as soon as possible. Sometimes my training schedule fills up on those lift days, so get that request in as soon as possible. When you're giving interim assessment blocks, it's really important that we don't forget about supports and accommodations. These are the best opportunity to ensure that students know how to use their supports and accommodations in the WCAP system. And when I say ensure that students know how to use their supports, I really mean that I want you to go through all the steps of planning, best practices from the IEP meeting all the way through, who's going to provide these supports and accommodations, who's going to show the student how to do it, so on and so forth, that I'm going to cover in great depth in just a few slides. TIDE management. TIDE is a system that feeds information about our students to the test delivery system and to our students. The next load of supports and accommodations from IEP and 504 plans will not be until January 16th. If your school is using any interim assessment blocks, then you're going to need to do some hand entry of those items. That can be taught in a TIDE management session. I'm happy to do that for you. Likewise, ML supports won't be loaded again until January 17th. If you've had any students who've come in since the last time we loaded, last month, then you'll need to get those hand coded as well if you're giving interims before the next term. Rosters will not be loaded again until February 12th after the term has changed over. If you need to update rosters for your teachers, you'll need to do so manually. All of these things I will teach at my TIDE management trainings. If you look at the orange box, I have them at 3 p.m. on November 28th, December 6th, and January 9th. I can schedule more if those times don't work, just let me know. So the following load won't be again until March. So just thinking about TIDE management, there should be a person who you picked to be your TIDE manager. They should have already been selected and at least partially trained. If they need to be trained, as you see the orange box, I'm happy to do that. They also should have updated staff in TIDE at least once. We last updated your staff in August. It is very likely that you've had some staffing changes. Please take a look in TIDE and update your staff rosters. There's a lot of confidential stuff in there. I don't want people having access to stuff they shouldn't. Next steps for TIDE managers is coding those updated supports for new ML, IEP, and 504 students, as well as those IEP students and 504 students who are new to having those plans. You're going to check for transfers for unusual coding. It sometimes happens that we get a lot of stuff that comes in with a student that may have been coded by mistake by another school or that may no longer be applicable to that student and hasn't been updated recently. So we always want to check that. Just keep in mind that if students have access to things they should not have and we cannot justify It could have consequences for us, including deleting the student score. So that would make me sad and make you sad. So we're going to check for that and make sure that that's not a problem. You do not need to be staying on top of it every moment, but you should be checking for it in particular as we approach spring. You're going to contact LMS if you have students who are not showing up in a timely fashion. And by timely, I mean like 8 days. If you have had a student active in 8 school days and they have still not showed up in Tide, that probably means something's wrong with something coded for them in eSchool, and we need to get it corrected. So please put in a help desk ticket with LMS for help with that. Moving on to more spring tasks. IEP teams. What should they already be doing to prepare for spring? Well, we should be thinking about our important guiding questions that we talked about in the fall about selecting accommodations. Is it relevant to the student's disability? Does the student actually know how to use it, or are they going to have some experience with using it before we get to spring? And then, is the student actually going to want to use it? Are they able to use it? For example, we have students who will not wear headphones. Headphones are very uncomfortable for them and they're going to be distracted and unhappy. That is not a good student to give noise buffers to. That's a bad support for them. We need to choose a different support for them. So we want to be thinking about as well, like the student's experience and the student's needs. So we're going to make sure as our next steps that all of our tools are coded in Tide. We stay on top of that. We're going to identify and inform the staff member who's training the student on these tools. Students will not just know how to use things because we want them to. We need to be intentional about training them too. So please make sure that the staff member who's going to be training the student knows how to use the tool, knows that they're going to need to train the student. And then just thinking ahead to spring, for example, if you have 45 students who need speech to text and need the little microphone that plugs into their computer, you need to make sure that you have at least 50 headsets that have a microphone. So be thinking about, are there special proctoring? Are there special physical tools you need? And incorporate that into your spring planning. Other things that administrators should be thinking about is start blocking out some time. Think about that proctor training. You need to plan for at least a half an hour on that proctor training. Try as I might, I cannot get it under half an hour and still cover the things that make me feel like our teachers are adequately supported. Think as well about general administration planning. When are you thinking of starting training tests? If you're a school that's been using interims, then maybe those trainings came already and you're not so worried about them. How are you going to handle when you're going to start those? How are you going to roll those out? Who's going to do them? And then, of course, how are you going to handle your schedule of testing? Thinking about your facilities and late start rooms, and especially makeup testing is always a problem. So start thinking about that schedule and your space and your staffing. And start planning now, because we know that those things can sneak up on us. So let's think about what it is that we are ultimately trying to do. We're trying to get a student from one spot to another spot. We want our students to get to their goal destination. So let's say we're trying to go from somewhere over here to somewhere over there. There's our little plane at the starting point. That plane needs to go through some stops. That plane is not a big plane, it's a little baby plane and it needs a bunch of gas. So we're going to start at the first stop of mapping this out, which is who's going to teach the student how to use the support and when are they going to do that? When is the student going to practice the support? Who's going to give them the tools and supplies that they might need? If the student needs an abacus, who's bringing their abacus? And then when are you going to talk to the student about the abacus? Let's say we're all on board for the abacus. The student uses the abacus, practices the abacus, and says, I am not a fan of the abacus. Actually, the tool I know how to use is the Rec and Rec. You're going to need to do some revisions. On that testing date, does the student need any special tools or special proctoring? Is there a physical item or a person that needs to be arranged for? Who's arranging them? Where are they going to take the test? If you have a student who needs to have it projected on a big screen, where's the room where the big screen isn't visible from the door that's accessible on that day, that has good internet, and we'll have a proctor who could do that. Details, details, details. Why are we practicing our supports and accommodations? And the answer is because students don't always know, such as, what is this thing? This is an icon representing a physical item in the real world, just some black lines. This thing is a toaster. It's a different kind of toaster. It's a toaster we're not familiar with. Here's a toaster that we're not familiar with. If you were to say to a student, hey, there's a toaster this way, and you gave them this weird toaster icon or even a picture of this weird toaster, they would say to themselves, I don't know what that way is. Students want this. This is not a good icon. This is a great icon for a toaster. There's some bread in there. It looks like a regular toaster that a student might have experience with. That's a great icon. But we don't always get great icons. Sometimes we get icons that students aren't familiar with and have no background to know, like an old-time microphone versus a recording symbol. This is what students think record looks like, but this is what the speech-to-text button looks like in the system. We can't change what the button looks like, but we can say to the student, this is the speech-to-text button. So, how do we ensure that the student can use their supports? We ensure that they have the opportunity to practice using them in the classroom. They know how to use the support. They use it every single day, and they do their homework with it. That's their support. And that support, in speech-to-text case, probably has this, not this. But they know how to use it. You're going to say, who's going to train the student on using that? Who's going to train them that when they record, they have to go back and make sure their punctuation's right? How are they going to do that, and when are they going to do that? Who's the person responsible, and how do they make time? And do they need something? Do they need a headset? And that headset needs to have a microphone. Then you want to do the exact same steps in the WCAP portal. This is the record button. Do you know how to use the record button? Who's going to teach the student that that's the record button? There's not some handy video that's going to play before the test. We are each individually responsible. Smokey the Bear slide. We are responsible for teaching our students how to use those supports and providing the tangible things that they need to use those supports for our students. And then, of course, you're going to consider those physical supports like we've now talked about. I know it feels like I'm flogging a dead horse, but I know this isn't happening in schools, and it needs to be happening in schools if we want to get valid, reliable, good test scores for our students to help us make strong decisions. So you're going to still review this last thing. Who's going to make sure those tangible supports or special proctors are in the right place at the right time during the test itself? Moving on to something I'm super excited about. There is now a toggle button in the math and science tests where a student can toggle between Spanish and English. But it's not active for every student. It's only active for students who are identified as having that need. So we're going to have your success coordinators determine which Spanish-speaking students would benefit from being able to toggle back and forth, and they're going to go ahead and give us the list, and we're going to get them coded and get their stuff all loaded up so that they'll be able to use this support. Notice that on both the English screen and also on the Spanish screen, all of the buttons, the activity buttons, are all in Spanish. That's part of Spanish presentation. If we choose Spanish presentation, even though we can also look at things in English, all of those buttons and all of the system messages will still show in Spanish. There's also some new supports around Spanish speakers in that math and science test for text-to-speech. So if you use your globe button, I don't speak Spanish, I'm not going to pronounce these words, but if you use the globe button to switch back and forth between Spanish and English, now when you use text-to-speech, it's going to know, is this Spanish or is this English? And even though the button is in Spanish, if the words on the screen here are in English, it's going to read them in English. If the words here on the screen are in Spanish, it will read them in Spanish. I have a new document, a new updated designated support for ML students. I know it looks similar, but it is different, so please review it. The top portion contains what designated supports are included for ML students in this district. There's some changes to that, so please note that that is the case. And then, of course, we have instructions on how to train your students. If we do not train our students on how to use those supports, from up here, they will never ever be able to successfully use them on their own because they're not going to expend the energy to learn them solo. Here in this graded blue area, this is all guidance around how to select additional supports for ML students on an individualized basis. This is something that your success coordinators and your ML teachers should look through carefully. We want to make smart decisions. We don't want to give students extra tools that complicate matters. We want to give them the right tools to help them be successful. And then down at the bottom, we have a reminder about the NNEP and rail policies for newcomers and who tests and how that all works. Those are down there. I'm not going to paraphrase them here, but I'll go over them again in depth for our spring training, but you can look them up on this document. And then I just want to draw your attention to the orange writing on the document, which is a reminder that any student can answer on the Math SBA in English, Spanish, or a mix of both. There are biliterate scorers standing by. If someone opens up a student test and there's Spanish on it, they will immediately send it over to a biliterate scorer who is going to handle scoring the test. So there's nothing coded, there's nothing required. That is just for everyone. So keep that in mind. More supports for ML students. I have a new support that I made called the ML Default Upload Template. It is an Excel spreadsheet. It is just a pre-slugged template that I pulled down out of Tide, but then I entered in all of the default ML supports that we code for our students who are not proficient in English. It is designed that you would have a new student, a singular new student. You would put their SSID in column A, choose their translation glossary language, and then upload it into Tide. It allows you to code 11 supports at one time for a student with minimal risk of error. So I think that's going to be a lot easier for your team. So your success coordinators will be able to use that. And I also made you some nice instructions on how to fill in the spreadsheet and how to do the upload. I'm hoping that this is going to be a big time saver for your ML staff. I also have another new ML support. It's a support for teachers who need to train their students on how to use their ML supports. So we always talk about using the practice and training tests with our students and showing them how to do stuff. This is a quick little video which will be available for your teachers to watch to learn about where the buttons are for their ML students. And then I made a reference sheet to go with it, because I know sometimes we watch the video and we say, yes, I know it. And then 2 days later, I'm like, what was I doing? What was I supposed to remember to show my students? So now I have a little cheat sheet. So when the teacher actually goes in and is doing the practice and training tests, she can make a point of making sure that each student knows where to find the buttons that they need that are different than the regular buttons. So I'm hopeful that that will help. Please don't just give everyone the cheat sheet. I think the cheat sheet is very scary looking if you have not watched the video. I don't want to overwhelm any teachers with all these crazy bubbles and everything, but it's very straightforward. If they watch the video is very short. All right, moving on to assessment security. Please make sure that any district employee or contractor who might be present around assessment does the security packet. I am a rule follower. I got this job not on accident. So I really would recommend that you just give this to anybody who might have need to go into the testing room. I've already given the security training to your field techs, so they're good. But if you have any nurses, behavioral support, student teachers, anybody who comes in, give them the security packet, throw it in your drawer with your testing stuff until you get your binders for spring. Just better safe than sorry. It's good that everybody knows what the deal is. That being said, that's not to say that just because we give the custodian, for example, the security packet, that they should be like vacuuming on the other side of the library during testing. When we pick a testing space, we need to be in a space where, by and large, it's going to be a good testing environment for our kids. We're not going to have random people wandering through doing other things. So it's fine if you want to use the library and the librarian has to quietly walk through to go to their office, that's appropriate. But we wouldn't want to use a space where there's going to be people coming and going with any frequency. Secure booklets. Other than WIDA alternate access, at this point I have no high school secure booklets, but I want to be very, very clear. about any secure booklets that I send to your school, whether they're alternate access or some other form of the test. They have to be locked up under lock and key in a limited access secure location that the person using them can access, but other people cannot. Do not put these booklets in district mail. I will come and collect them myself, or someone from Categorical will come and collect them, or I will request hand delivery, but never ever will it go through district or USPS mail. Please use sign-in, sign-out forms to ensure that there is a chain of custody. If there are two people accessing those materials, they should be signing in and out the materials so that if something were to go missing, we'd have some idea of where to look and we wouldn't have to tear everything up everywhere. So those are just security best practices. I strongly recommend that you pay attention to them, particularly that security packet. I know you've seen the slide. I'm going to go really fast. We sent you the assessment calendar to use for basic planning. We also send you a much more detailed monthly assessment outlook that comes at the very beginning of the month. And it's really important that you take a peek at it and just make sure, is there something that you need to do? And then forward it on to your leadership team. Like, hey, here's some stuff that needs to happen. There you go. That's going to come in the communications to principals. The only other communications to principals that I send have action items in them. They're usually instructions and things like that. I'll try and repeat them in brief in the monthly outlook or put a link to them. But the best practice is that you forward them as soon as possible. And if you're having trouble getting through those communications to principals, it's probably a good idea to assign someone else to take a quick peek at them in advance of when you read it, just to be able to say, oh, hey, there's a thing and it's timely. Pick someone you trust. That's my recommendation. I know that you guys have a lot on your plate. Email. If I email you, it's about timely and school-specific information. Please attend to it. I never ever email you unless I am told I must email you or I need something about your school right away. So please make sure that any information that you get from me, you're paying attention to. I swear to you, I try really hard not to email you if I can help it. I know you've got a lot. Looking ahead to spring, we've got building plans being released in early February, being due on March 7th. I have in-person administrator training, so I can go through proctor training on the new proctor training. That will be very exciting. They'll be all nice and new. You guys have the AP test coming up. You have Smarter Balanced, WACUS, and of course, WAAIM. If you need help, these are the contacts that you can reach out to, but I want to encourage you that if you need help and you can't remember where you put your screen grab of this chart and you want help right now, it is totally fine to call me. Even if it's not my assessment, I will help figure it out. So when in doubt, give me a call and I'll get you redirected. We here in the CRC are standing by. We want to be of assistance to you. We want to help our students. So please don't hesitate to ask. It's never a bother to help you. That's the presentation. I'll have some office hours. I also have some tied trainings. I will send you all that information in the email that you got to probably get to this video. Please feel free to come to office hours or to send me any of your questions over email. Thanks a lot. Have a great day.